Okay, so my presentation is about the journalism revolution in Egypt. The main things I'm going to be talking about is whether Egypt had a free press or not, the role of citizen journalists, and whether things are improving. I've also got a case study as well.
Copy down.
It's just quick to show you the location of Egypt. It's in Africa. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the history of journalism in Egypt. Journalism in Egypt has never been easy. Former President Nasser, he officially banned pluralism in favour of a unanimous press, which created what is known as the mixed press. And then also in September 1981, former President Sadat ordered the arrest of more than 1,500 opposition figures, including campaigners, intellectuals and journalists. This period is referred to as Black September. It was a pivotal point in the contemporary history of journalism in Egypt. Al Bram's advertising company has almost total control over the advertising industry, which allowed National Press newspapers to corner the lion's share of advertising and revenue, and it also denied opposition press any financial security, making it very unstable for them. That's just the Freedom House Press Freedom Index. In 2013, Freedom House put Egypt from partly free to not free. The reasons why, I know Vera touched on this earlier, is Egypt declined from partly free to not free due to officially tolerated campaigns to intimidate journalists, increased efforts to prosecute reporters and commentators for insulting the political leadership, or defaming religion, and intensified polarisation of the pro-anti-Muslim Brotherhood press, which reduced the availability of balanced coverage. Positions have always varied on the press freedom index as well, but Egypt's always been ranked low. In 2011 to 2012 it was 166, and then 2010 it was 127. And currently, at the moment, it stands at 158. Just got a brief summary of the revolution. Began on the 25th of January 2011. It was a diverse movement using marches, demonstrations, non-violent protests, occupations, labour strikes and riots. The main aims of the revolution were to oust Hosni Mubarak from his post as Egyptian president. They also wanted the end of emergency law, freedom, justice, a responsive non-military government, and a sound management of Egypt's resources. Activists occupied Tahrir Square, and Cairo was described as a war zone due to clashes from protesters. On the 11th of February, Mubarak stepped down from his post and handed control over to the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. And since then, Egypt has found another president that is now once again under military rule. But the pre-revolution press conditions, like what it was like before. The national press had control over distribution networks, so they were able to select when and when opposition papers were distributed in order to spread propaganda and dominate the media. Each paper had to undergo an annual authorisation from the High Council of the Press. There was also an ambiguous legal framework which encouraged self-censorship. And blogs and internet journalists were on the rise as they helped spread an independent message. And also the independent press was also more like an observer or a spectator rather than active in the media. It's got post-revolution press conditions. During the early days of the, they were more stringent under military rule, as defamation laws are abused and harassment of journalists is a regular occurrence. However, a lot of media outlets have stood firm, reporting the conditions under military rule. 6 journalists were killed in 2013, and countless others have been harassed or intimidated, and stuff like that. How was the revolution reported? News outlets relied heavily on amateur footage and videos on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and lots of other social media. During the early days of the revolution, the major national news outlets ignored the demonstrations and unrest, and they reported on other things and tried to spread propaganda about Mubarak and try and convince people that he was still heavily supported. However, as the movement grew, it couldn't be ignored, and coverage was focused on the revolution. However, independent news outlets stood firm during the whole thing and refused to give in to mass media pressure. Also a very live battle between the national and the independent press. They're going to talk a bit about the role of citizen journalists and bloggers in the revolution. There was a massive increase leading up, but also the two Facebook groups that originated the protests, the April 6th Youth Movement and the We Are Khaled Said, which is named after a victim of police brutality. Twitter trends and other social media helped like-minded people come together, so they were able to link up and spread their views and opinions. It's been referred to as the Facebook Revolution, due to the massive influence of social media on the events. However, the print press did also play a large role in helping the movement. The people in favour of the revolution were able to communicate through social media and therefore become a stronger threat to the Mubarak regime. Even when the internet was cut off, they were still able to find like-minded people through such like texting people to get them to tweet for them and other things like that. It's also allowed the movement to become a lot more effective. Okay, are journalists safe in Egypt? 6 have been killed and 4 have been imprisoned in 2013. Attempts to criticise military rule and met with violence and intimidation. Ahmed Waji called for the Attorney General to investigate how public funds are used in the broadcasting industry. He was later prohibited from appearing on camera, also makes it a lot more difficult to spread his thoughts and feelings. In May, major protests against military rule led on attacks and detentions of 18 journalists who were covering the demonstrations. Constitutions that were in effect during Mubarak's reign that allowed journalists to be prosecuted for what they say are still in place, and that creates a dangerous element in the Egyptian media. And unfortunately, detention of journalists is common, as well as brutality from police and other government officials. Got a case study. This is Mikhail Nabil Sanad. He was arrested on the 4th of February by military police and was tortured. He was then arrested again on the 28th of March by military intelligence in his home. He was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment on charges of insulting the military. He was accused of insulting the military in his post, "The army and the people were never one hand," where he criticised them. He was subject to horrible conditions, such as an insect-laden bed, which caused him to have horrible skin rashes. And he was also put in prison with common prisoners who bullied and intimidated him, and they were also supporters of the regime, so he was subject to horrible conditions. He fell into 2 comas while he was imprisonated as well. He was pardoned on the 23rd of January 2012. He described himself as a liberal, secular, capitalist, feminist, pro-Western, pro-peace, atheist, materialist, realist, pro-globalist, anti-militarist, pacifist. He said very strong ideas, and he was tortured and imprisoned for trying to communicate them. Okay, so are things improving in Egypt? The Press Freedom Index is higher than it was last year, but Freedom House have demoted it as well, so there's not things aren't really better. Violence and harassment to journalists is still apparent. Military rules allowed violence as protests against it have continued. Many blogs and independent journalists still believe something needs to be done. Many would claim that the old regime is still intact, there's just a different leader at the helm of it. So one thing is for certain in Egypt, that things still need to improve, that there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, thank you.